National Treasury is concerned about the number of municipalities failing to spend billions of rand allocated to them. Now, over 250 municipalities have failed to use their funds, leading, of course, to poor services in those communities. Treasury has also flagged the liquidity of some municipalities, with most of them failing to collect enough revenue. And, of course, this is in the wake of particularly issues arising in Johannesburg and in Tshwane as well. We're going to unpack this in just a moment with Dr Harlan Cloete. He is a local governance expert at the University of the Free State. But part of some of the key takeaways in this report from Treasury is that some capital budgets and operating budgets, only 46% of those budgets that this is adopted expenditure was actually spent. So less than 50% of the budget for a given municipality has actually been spent, and the money has actually gone to the services that communities so desperately need. And of course, that is never a good thing when municipalities have to send money back to Treasury, because it means there are service delivery gaps. We'll try and get Dr Harlan Cloete back on the line in just a moment. In fact, he is back on the line. Dr. Cloete, you can hear us now. Apologies for some of the glitches taking place in the system. But yeah, this is not a win, right? This is not a win for state coffers to have this money sent back to Treasury.
No, definitely good afternoon to you and good afternoon to the viewers as well. No, it's not a win. You know, it's an indication. It means that if we cannot spend our resources, it means that ultimately communities suffer, and what was planned in terms of infrastructure spend, jobs opportunities and services, that does not happen.
Yeah. We're talking about water shortages, which we've experienced not only in Gauteng, in very many municipalities around the country as well. Water shortages, water infrastructure issues, electricity infrastructure issues, housing issues, education, the list goes on and on and on. These are where all the gaps lie. And of course, it filters down to the smaller issues as well, right? Are the potholes in my road being fixed? Are all the street lights working? And so on.
Look, I think we need to understand that there's a process happens within municipalities. Where we are now, they are busy budgeting for next year. The municipalities calendar works from 1 July to 30th of June. And then there's a budget, and that has to be spent. But there's also the supply chain process, you know, that also takes time. And so a lot of the infrastructure spend has to government procure services, and there's a rigorous process in terms of supply chain management. And sometimes it's the issue of not planning properly. Sometimes it takes long to appoint service providers, and there's also an opportunity, or if I did not get the tender, to be able to appeal that process. So if there's underspending, it often points to either a lack of planning or poor planning, or it comes down to poor project management, foresight, and so it's a host of issues that contribute to underspending within government.
Yeah, I want to ask your take on this. The Treasury report also talks about, and this is particularly insofar as Tshwane and Johannesburg metros are concerned. Treasury has now notified these metros that it's going to be cutting a combined, it's almost 2 billion rand in grants due to underperformance. When we're talking about finance allocations, how does grants fit into the conversation, Dr. Cloete? And I know you did give us a caveat that you're not a finance expert, but can you comment on the issue of grants?
Look, there's the equitable share, and so Treasury, they've got, for example, the MIG grant, which is a municipal infrastructure grant that comes from Treasury, right. And that gets allocated to municipalities. So it is worrying if municipalities underspend in terms of that, because that is money that has been budgeted for by the fiscus that is not being spent by municipalities for a variety of reasons, like I said. One could be capacity or competence, and sometimes a Treasury also released a report last year that some municipalities are simply not capable, that we've got a capability problem. They simply don't know how to get the work done. And so the problems of local government is not necessarily solved through training, but to increase the capability of the institution to be able to deliver on its mandate.
Yeah. And you're talking about that. These two metros that we're talking about, Johannesburg and Tshwane, they are governed by coalitions, and they are fragile, and they are shifting and changing coalitions, aren't they? Part of the problem that they've been facing is that they've been struggling to collect revenue from their consumers as well. I mean, Tshwane was cutting off businesses and private residences to the tune of millions of rand just a couple of weeks ago.
And that is the problem. You know, I had a conversation doing field work the last month or so in February. One of my discussions was with a consultant that I met in one of the municipalities. And we had a long discussion about why do we depend on them? And you know, what comes out is the environment of local government is not attracting the people with the right skills. When we have coalitions sometimes and they're unstable, that instability, that political instability, unfortunately spills over to the administration. Now we no longer focus on what must be done, but how do we protect our own interests? That is the problem, the instability that it creates. You know, I was at one municipality where half of the people in the room said, I'm an acting manager this and I'm an acting that. Yeah. And so certain people, I've got no doubt that certain people profit through the chaos and the instability at local government. But political instability, there's nothing wrong with coalitions, but if they're unstable and they are constituted around wrong principles, then that spills over into revenue collection, where we no longer focus on what must be done, but we focus on what we can get out of the system.
Yeah. And actually, I remember I think you and I were having a conversation about this exact issue. The issue of coalitions and the fact that coalitions are, for better or worse, here to stay in South Africa. And I was asking you that question in connection with the build-up to the elections in May. And I think your answer, Dr. Cloete, was, yes, May is important, but let's look further down the line to the local government elections. That's the one to watch.
No, I still stand with that. You know, the local government elections in 2026 is going to be telling. I think we're going to see more coalitions. I think we need to probably over the next 3 years develop our coalition maturity, because a lot of times what we see happening on the national provincial sphere, that spills over to the local sphere. So I've got no doubt that we'll have one or two provincial coalitions in this election, and even on the national sphere. Who's to say? But that coalitions are here to stay. Yeah. I still stand with that, and we need to create or develop our coalition maturity. Also, I think civil society must not rest on their laurels. I think if there are lessons to be learned from the last 30 years in governance, is that South African citizens and their formations should not sit back and leave everything to government. You know, we cannot allow the government do all the thinking and citizens sits back and say, no, you deliver services to me. We as citizens will have to become much more vigilant, and even academic institutions, the type of research that we produce in institutions should be able to challenge the status quo and to advocate for social change. I mean, day after day we talk about the problem, but it seems that we do not are so far from finding a solution. And so we need almost a new coalition, what the National Development Plan speaks of, this multi-sectoral approach involving government, business, community, and the academia to solve the complex problems within the government.
And, you know, you mentioned this as such a passing remark, developing coalition maturity. How do we go about doing that? And I think the answer probably lies in exactly what you've just said about having a more active citizenry.
I think coalition maturity comes for me through evidence-based policy making and evidence that we put on the table. If a thing is not working, we need to, I think coalition maturity also comes with pragmatism. We cannot, we cannot let the tail wag the dog. If the electorate are saying to the two bigger parties, we're not trusting you with the majority. It is in actual fact saying, please don't gang up, and form coalitions not based on principle. The principles of the Constitution, those are the principles that should guide our coalition, forming of coalitions. And a coalition is basically saying, let's put our purpose together. Let's see what are the problems. The problems in South Africa remains inequality, poverty, and unemployment. What are the best ways in which we can solve it, and how do we use the state and its mechanisms to create these institutions or this enabling environment to solve these complex problems in society? And how do we involve the academia? How do we involve other partners? Because government cannot do all the thinking. We cannot leave all the thinking to government. We need to co-create, co-govern. I think that is what this is about. How do we co-govern? Because the election after this election will tell us that we cannot trust one party, single party, with the majority. That is what the electorate told us in 2021 with the local government elections, and that will increase.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, not being in it for your own self-interest is probably incredibly important as well. Dr. Harlan Cloete, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. He is a local governance expert with the University of the Free State.